My apologies if I'm all over the place with this video. Happy Friday, by the way. It's Good Friday, isn't it? Yeah, I believe so. If it's not Good Friday, I'm tripping. But we've had a great week of streams. We're going to cap it off on Sunday at 7 p.m. with a Twitch stream, 7 p.m. Central. So please follow me over at twitch.tv/YoungGroup59. And I will have the stream schedule out for the upcoming week. You know, that's what we're doing now. I'll be on the community wall as well as on my, Facebook, is Twitter. It'll be pinned to the top, so you'll know the stream schedule come for the coming week. That'll be dropping probably before the stream that we do at 7 p.m. tomorrow. So you'll have the stream schedule for next week. Thank you. It's been a crazy week. It's the first kind of test run. I messed around with some times to see when people are more tentative. Things are kind of crazy. People's schedules are jacked up because of this whole virus thing. So a big shout out to you and thank you so much. I wanted to talk about some of the kind of weird things that, look, we get it. Models are being revised down, and these aren't models that are being revised down because the social distancing is working. That's not what's happening. They are just getting new data, and they're seeing that a lot of models have exaggerated what this is going to be so far. They always accounted for extreme social distancing in some of these models. But we were watching in my last stream Dr. John Ioannidis talk about of Stanford University, epidemiologist. He was talking about some of the odd things that made Italy, which we've discussed for a month now, that made Italy such an odd situation. And when it comes to how they had impacted their country. And he's talking about, well, Italy had a perfect storm, and he blamed it for the term that he uses, demographics. It's a term that I've been using for weeks on end about this whole situation. And it's such a basic thing, but maybe this stems from, and I would love to, as you guys comment in the comment section and talk amongst each other, I would love to know you guys' input on this. It makes so many people uncomfortable to talk about demographics. It's not even specifically with this issue, with other issues as well. It's like people want to ignore it, or they only want to talk about it in the event they can maybe talk about something positive. Generally, something negative, people they get real cringy and uncomfortable. They don't want to discuss it. But it's such an important thing to discuss when we talk about something like this. And the interview that I'm talking about regarding Dr. John Ioannidis is this. And he talks about in this interview how it's very unlikely that what happened in Italy would happen in America. Why? Because they are generally, as an example, at capacity when it comes to the hospitals almost every winter. So any slight nudge to that is going to overwhelm certain particular hospitals. He talks about how that is the age demographic. They have a much older population, and we know that this is a virus that impacts people of those like the older folk a lot more, way more than what it does younger folk, in terms of them having a severe reaction or dying to it. He also talks about some of the diseases that are very common out there. And all of this creates a perfect storm for the situation that what they had there. And it just gets me thinking about how that's a pretty big deal. That's a demographic thing, definitely with the hospital beds, for example. Like he says that there are a third of, like, I believe in proportion to the population, there's a third of the beds. They have a third of the available hospital beds in comparison to America. It's a big stat. So you've probably heard, I know I've seen, we're on track to be the next Italy. Now what that means, who knows? But when you consider some of the proponents, it's different. And this is, look, I understand why people, and this, well, I'll tell you what, this is my guess. Why people, my shirt is real wrinkly, holy cow. Why people find it or are uncomfortable talking about this, because definitely when they're dealing with models, is a newer virus, trying to figure out what's going on with it. And to be fair to Italy, it's easy to say look at some of these things in retrospect in terms of what they did wrong, such as another thing Dr. Johnny Ioannidis admitted, which is a big time contributing factor to their overwhelmed hospitals in certain areas. They were trying to get on top of it, but they were hospitalizing or putting people in the hospital, having them utilize their resources, even with mild and not severe symptoms. So no symptoms, mild symptoms, people that didn't need to be in the hospital, but they were utilizing those resources. So the people that actually need them, there wasn't available beds for them. So they were eating up those resources. And again, it's easy to say that in retrospect. But if we are going to compare and contrast, if we're going to take what happened and then we're going to apply it somewhere else, definitely when it comes to influencing policy, demographics have to be discussed. You saw me do my video when I talked about, I'm going to throw these facts out there to you. Here, this was, 2 days ago when I did this video? And I talked about how a third of the confirmed cases in the entire country of the United States of America are in one state, and that is New York. And over a third of the deaths are in, the deaths from this virus are in New York, that one state. 56% of the confirmed cases in the state, I believe it's actually more now, but at the time, 56% of the cases in the state were out of one city, New York City. Obviously, that's the most populated city in the country. 75% of the deaths in that one state are in one city. So if you add all of this up, 30%, which is a big percentage, 30% of the deaths in the entire country come from one city. America has 330-some million people. 50 states, thousands of cities. 30% of the deaths come out of one city. And when you consider some of the things from a demographic standpoint, how close quarters they are, it's 8 million people. It's a very densely populated place. For those that aren't here, we all don't live like that. New York City is a very, very, very unique place. But not everybody lives like that. The vast majority of the country doesn't live like that. To put that into perspective even more so, 42% of the deaths in the entire country are in New York, the state. So one state is responsible. You're creeping up on almost 50% of the deaths, with 42%. 42% of the deaths come from one state. Just to put this in perspective, New York is not the most popular. So you can go there with the city, but New York isn't the most populated state. For example, we just crept over 200 in Texas. Only 200 more deaths. Not 200 more deaths. Only 200, roughly 200 deaths now. It's a little over 200 deaths. That's it. Yet the state is more populated than what New York is. We have like 10 million more people than what New York State has. I believe Florida has more people than New York as well. But does this one-size-fits-all sort of national lockdown, though it didn't come from the federal level, it's like this consensus in many different countries are doing this. But it's so ill-advised, and this is what Johnny Ioannidis sort of talks. Well, he doesn't say that it's ill-advised. I want to be fair to him. He's saying that this does have potential to be one of the greatest evidence fiascos of all time, because they're making policies, definitely from an economic shutdown standpoint, off gut feeling. They just now starting to roll out some of these antibody tests. So, the actual infection rate, we'll be able to put that into perspective. The infection mortality rate, we'll be able to put that stuff into perspective. But these are tests that are just getting rolled out. They didn't know. They have no idea how many people have it, how long it's been here. Who knows? But you had such sweeping impact in terms of, maybe it was out of fear, applying these different, not a different, applying the same one size fits all shutdown sort of approach to the entire country, even though they aren't even impacted the same way. We're seeing that. Even from a demographic standpoint, from an age standpoint. I talked about, and I think I may still have it pulled up, when it comes to the hospital, the whole point of the flatten the curve thing, right? Quote unquote, flatten the curve, is to minimize the hospitalization, or more so the hospital utilization. You have a certain spot that is here in terms of the actual medical apparatus, the medical standard, if you will. You don't want to get above it. You don't want to exhaust all that. When it comes to people that are needing it, you don't want to exhaust that, those resources. So they're trying to spread it out over time. Now, yes, there are epidemiologists. We talk about Dr. Wachowski on this channel and how he's like, this is the dumbest idea, basically. We should have been quarantining the people that had, they were immunocompromised and the elderly, and everybody else should have been passing this thing around so we could build some sort of herd immunity. That's his argument, but that's neither here nor there. There is a clear, from an age even standpoint, there's a clear, if even if you are one of those, we gotta, flatten the curve, right? This is New York City per 100,000 people. Roughly only 5% of the people that are using the hospital resources right now. And hospitalization is going to be, I don't know how they're defining it. I know it's defined different places, different areas, but hospitalizations could generally mean that they're just being admitted they went. That does not necessarily mean that they needed to be there. Okay. So they would have more of a case for an indiscriminate application of a lockdown if it looked more like this. Right. And this was up here, but it's not. These are the hospitals. We already know the deaths are even lower than that. Only like 1% of the deaths are right here, between the ages of 0 and 44. But if you look at the hospitalization rates in New York City per 100,000, only roughly 5%, I did the math, are between ages 44 and 0 years of age. So 95% of them are used by people 45 years of age and older. And obviously, as you increase in that age, the more per 100,000 we talk about with hospitalizations. So what this is putting into perspective is that the people that aren't generally using your resources, if you're trying to flatten the curve, these people right here, this is a big block of people. These are a big block of working age people. These people generally don't even work. A lot of these people don't even work right here, like 75 or the ones that are using your the ones that want to talk about economics, want to talk about the economy, the ones that are right here generally don't even work. Some of them do, but not all of them work. They're retired, done. You have a big block of, definitely between ages 18 and 44, a block of youngsters. Well, I mean, if you want to call it, well, you can't say youngsters. Just a block of people that are of adult age, that are working, that need to be working, that could be working. You can make the argument for, not to say that every single person in this would work that are in this age group, no. And obviously, once you can break it down even more when we talk about the people with these underlying diseases, underlying sicknesses, like and underlying conditions. It's even more so slight if you took them out and put them, let's say, into more of a quarantine. So to have an indiscriminate lockdown, even though we know that it doesn't impact everybody the same way, even with your ideas of flatten the curve, right? Which that's the whole point. If you shut these guys down, it would have made more sense. And I'm not saying I personally advocate that. I'm saying if you just feel like people had to be locked down, it makes more sense to emphasize these guys, not these guys over here, because these guys aren't the ones that are generally using your hospitals. So I'm not willing to concede this idea that if you let these guys, they can still practice your social distancing methods and such. Again, some people argue that that's not a good thing. Social distancing is a bad thing, but I'm just accepting what you guys have been peddling as far as the narrative. If you accept this and these people were out being diligent, taking precautions, let's say that, and still out among the world working, this would go up. But I don't see who's to say that, and I don't see any obviously evidence. It's very hard to compile data that would depict that. I don't see any evidence that suggests that these guys right here, Even if they were going out and it wasn't an indiscriminate lockdown, these guys went up. Obviously, they maybe would. It's a chance of that. If these guys are in quarantine and this went slightly up, who's to say that you're going to overwhelm your hospitals? And this is the last point that I'm going to make on that. I know if you watch CNN, and they don't ever mention demographics. They'll mention outliers. So John Anita says, like, they will cover those, every case that they possibly can, and it makes it seem like it's we don't do this for any other disease or any other sickness. There's no ticker like that in which people are the media is just tracking down everybody that dies from every single. That doesn't happen. This is something that's new and it's something that's unique. But what's going on in New York City, which I've been getting conflicting things, but let's concede the point that they are having to enact, let's say, some emergency protocols, which hospitals do, by the way. They should be preparing for that. What's going on in New York City isn't what's going on in every other area. We've talked about in Oklahoma, Tennessee, how there are workers that are being furloughed when you have and laid off and cut hours because hospital workers, because they, in preparation, which you can argue is a good thing, they have attempted to get ahead of this, moving down the line, more elective surgeries and elective procedures and such like that to focus solely on this. And because they're not getting that wave of folks like they anticipated, they're having to lay people off. This is a real thing that's happening in this country because, believe it or not, demographics are real. New York City, what's going on in New York City could have a multitude of different factors, but what's taking place in New York City is not taking place everywhere else in the country. Not out here, not in a lot of other places. Dr. Yannis was saying this even with Italy. The majority of hospitals weren't actually overwhelmed. There were some that were, but not the majority of them. And this is what he talks about. And again, this is an economic question, not a medical question per se. It's an economic question because we talk about mobilizing different hospital resources, allocating different hospital resources. That seems to maybe be one of the more focuses that we need. Okay? Guys, that's all I'm saying, man. Demographics are real. Certain hospital areas cover a wide range of population, certain other ones don't. So it's more likely to be overwhelmed. These are all things that have to be taken into consideration. Population density, how those people act. Believe it or not, there is when you see what happens in South Korea versus Italy, demographics have a lot to do with why they got severely different outcomes. But it makes people so uncomfortable to talk about that as if it's, I don't know. It's like, I don't know. Maybe it's because it puts a dent in this whole equality thing. And sometimes the models would be far more accurate if people were robots, okay? If people were robots, that would make sense. If people were individuals that acted the same way, of all age groups, were impacted the same way, definitely when it comes to viruses, live the same way in different areas, the models would make a lot more sense. But you can't, it's nearly impossible to account for human action. But it makes people so offended to talk about it because you bring it up, like I've brought this up among other people. It's like, well, guys, we're almost reaching half of the cases that are coming out of one state. And America is a massive geographical area, but everybody's locked down indiscriminately, or it's the same kind of applied method here, even though this is going to impact certain areas different ways. I'm also talking about hospitals closing down in New York as well. That's something that I failed to mention before. There's so many things that have to be taken into consideration when you're going to implement policy. And the thing that sucks about this all, because they didn't have that conversation, and I know there's going to be they didn't know much about it, so they had to do it, dog. We're going on almost, week 4, you know what I'm saying? unemployment, 10% of the workforce has just been eliminated. Like this is getting to epic proportions. Okay, guys, and when do the economic consequences outweigh what is taking place? That's not really what this video is about. But look, it's a conversation that you have to have, definitely, when it comes to a policy, no matter how uncomfortable that it makes you. And the thing that sucks about it is that if they do end up getting this wrong, anybody can be wrong. You've had experts that have been completely on different sides, even on the mortality rate, because again, they haven't been rolling out those antibody tests, so they don't really know how many people have been infected, how infectious this. They know it's maybe it's contagious, but in terms of how how it's running through people, they have absolutely no idea. It's just guess when it comes to the more infected mortality rate. It's a guess. They don't know. They don't know, and you'll get people that are guessing on the. We talked about Dr. J. Bashard, I believe is how you say his last name, of Stanford. And we talked to him about well, we didn't talk to him. Hoover Institute, I believe, that were the guys that were talking to him about that, and he was like, he's guessing on the 0.01 mortality rate side. And unfortunately, folks he's saying that his own colleagues have been telling him like to get in line. They didn't like the fact that article was published. And it's like, we all know this. Why are you mad at me? And that goes to show that just because these guys are medical doctors does not mean that they can't be politically motivated, cannot, get it wrong. Certainly, definitely on something that is this early on. There's a lot of things that can change in a short period of time. But it makes people so uncomfortable to talk about demographics. And the thing that sucks the most about it, I don't see an event where the shot callers are ever going to admit they're wrong. They'll try to word it as if they had to do it or it made sense at the time before they ever admit, okay, we overestimated. We've seen entire models revised all the way down. As it's looking right now, this could change. And if it changes, it changes. But as it's looking right now, they were extremely exaggerating how lethal this was. And they'll never admit they're wrong, even though it has an economic kickback, even after 3 weeks. This is real, dog. Like this sucks. I don't know, man. I want to know what your thoughts is. What is it about demographics that makes people so uncomfortable to talk about, even especially when something like this is something that we have to take into consideration anyway? If we are going to look to, let's say, some place like Italy and say, well, we're going to be the next Italy. Like, okay, like, are we really? And what made Italy Italy? And in order to do that, you'd have to talk about the demographics. But they think we're robots, I guess.